So I didn't grow up with a lawn. I grew up actually in a more rural area where the front of our property mostly consisted of rocks, dirt, native plants, weeds, etc. So I was really shocked when I, as an adult, moved into the suburbs. Suddenly I have this big responsibility for a lawn. I have to water it, I have to cut it, we have to weed whack, all to make sure that the HOA doesn't get onto our case, and so that our lawns look consistent with everyone else's. It's kind of a hell cycle and a really annoying responsibility. More so, I was cleaning out my box garden the other day, and the amount of grass I had to pull up and it is so hard to get rid of. Even when I use landscaping fabric, pull it out as much as I can, it always comes back. So here's my hot take. Grass sucks. And I'm cursed by the American lawn. Alright, y'all, let's get comfortable because shooting that first part had me covered in grass, and very coincidentally, I was interrupted by lawnmowers like 2-3 times, and honestly it just made me way more agitated and fired up about the situation. So let's just start off by talking about the history of grass and the American lawn and how it kind of came to be. So the American lawn that we know it to be now originates from where all terrible things seem to kind of originate from. And you guessed it, it's British colonialism.
Hip hip! Boo! Hip hip! Boo!
So lawns and the concept of lawns basically started around the 17th century, where British aristocrats would have these very large estates. So think Bridgerton, you know, they're always going on long walks places, and they're doing promenades and all this jazz. They have these very large estates, and showing their means of wealth, aside of having an estate in the first place, we're having these like beautiful gardens and these very nice manicured lawns. It created a really big class divide because you then had workers who were able to tend to these lawns, and so you create a division of class. Those who have lawns, those who do not have lawns, and usually work on lawns. I guess you could say there's the grass and the grass knots. I don't know if that joke works.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
So, tale as old as time, England then colonizes North America, and with it they bring their livestock. To feed the livestock, they then import the same grass that they are using for their estates and their lawns out in the UK, Britain, England. I don't know if those things are different. Anyways, they bring that same grass over here to feed said livestock, and so they can continue to grow and colonize, etc. A good example of this is the commonly used grass. I think they use it for sports stadiums and like parks. It's called like bluegrass, which they try to like brand it as American, but it's technically an import from England. So it's just kind of ironic that they try to give this American name, but really it came from England. So grass had a very like functional purpose when it was first brought here. You know, it's for food only. They didn't really worry about lawns or estates in the same way that they did in England. So after the American Revolution, America tried to create its brand new identity as a new country, you know, all these grand ideas, but the reality is they carried a lot of the exact same ideals from England to America. Great example of that would be the American lawn. So I guess you can take the colonizers out of England, but you can't take England out of the colonizers. So very much the same thing, very large class divide, only Americans were using enslaved people to keep their lawns, but it continued to be this kind of elitist concept. So if you had that lawn, you usually were a slave owner and you usually had money. As technology progressed through time and urbanization began to happen between the two of them, lawns became a lot more accessible and easier maintained by the common person. So for example, like having lawn mowers, planning, so like the creation of the suburbs and park areas made lawns more common and made them more accessible to the average person, and eventually we end up with that like 1950s concept of like Susie having lemonade on the lawn while your dad mows his like tiny little lot out front. That kind of American lawn concept. So over time, lawns became this thing that originally was for the really wealthy and now is intended for and meant for the common folk, the typical homeowner in the suburban area. So as much as I find lawns like super annoying, and that's the big part that I want to complain about on top of them being classist, the reality is that there's environmental impacts that lawns have that are detrimental, that are damaging, that we should probably talk about. So according to the US EPA, about 1/3 of residential water use goes towards outdoor watering, whether that's for gardens or for lawns and landscaping. Probably more so lawns and landscaping than gardening, but maybe I'm biased because I'm trying to garden out here. In total, about 9 billion gallons of water is used per day for lawns and landscaping, which is crazy. I mean, I know it's across the entire United States, but that number just seems like so large that I can't seem to like conceptualize how much that is. But the point being driven home is like it uses a lot of water. Depending on your area, using your water to water your lawn unnecessarily has different impacts. So a good example of that is that I grew up on a well water system that was dependent upon an aquifer. And my family had to be really careful in conserving water usage because we would then run the risk of that well running dry and then not having water. So it's definitely very different when you go from like using city water to well water. But again, it varies based on your region, whether you're like in a rural and an urban area. But regardless, there are consequences to how much water you are using. Another major concern is runoff. So a lot of people will use pesticides or fertilizers to keep their lawn like nice and green and pretty. I'm saying this with such a bitter tone because I don't like lawns. So like just know that the context of this comes from a mean place. I'm very biased here. But people who use that can cause water pollution. So like whenever it rains, your water runoff, all the water that's coming through that is also full of pollutants, i.e. your fertilizer and your chemicals. And I don't know if you were just born yesterday, but it's bad. Polluting the water is bad. Another thing to think about with grass lawns is the lack of biodiversity. So taking consideration like the ecosystem of a backyard, your native plants are now being replaced by lawns and then disrupting the ecosystem around it. So that's your butterflies, your bees, your insects, other wildlife that may be impacted. It creates inequitable species growth, can decrease pollination just because that land's being used for grass rather than other native plants. And that can affect things like pollination, which then affects things like food sources. So I think like it seems very small and minimal, but as a whole, the more lawns you have, the more that impacts. So how does one then escape the American lawn? So if you own your own property, there's different types of landscaping methods that you can use to kind of counteract or like alternatives to the American lawn. One example of that is called xeriscaping, which is a lot more popular in drought-ridden areas. So like Texas has a lot of them. I think more like southwestern areas are more popular for xeriscaping. That's an option. The downside is that it can be very expensive. It's something that I've wanted to do for a while. Just haven't had the money to do so, but it's a good way to create spaces that you don't have to water. I have heard some downsides about it, but I think the idea is primarily so it's like you have more space that you don't have to water, and therefore you can like maintain a nice landscaping without it looking like just dirt in the front yard. Another thing that you can do is plant only native species and native grass in your lawn. So that's usually better too because you probably won't be watering it as much because it's conducive to the environment that it's typically supposed to be in because it's native, right?
You. You're cool. You. I'm out.
One of the big things that blocks me from doing this is my HOA. And my HOA, I already have beef with them, but I have even more beef with them knowing that I can't do these things. I would love to do xeriscaping in my front yard. The only thing is, like, it's expensive, right? But I think it is okay HOA-wise, so that would probably be, like, my better option given my circumstances. But yeah, you could also do native species only. You might have to cut some of it down for, like, safety purposes, so you're not, like, in a brush field. On, like, a personal wish list, I kind of just wish that lawns weren't still this, like, concept of, like, the American dream. It's all what, like, suburban neighborhoods want. It's all part of the aesthetic. Like, I would love if we could just move away from that, because, again, like, I'm wasting so much time watering lawnmowers, weed whackers. It's really annoying. And when I'm picking out of my garden, just, like, I'll pull the, like, one root of grass, and it's just like a circuit, like a network of a bunch of other grass pieces, and it drives me insane. No amount of lawn fabric that I lay down seems to create a barrier for the grass. I swear, like, I sound pissed, because I am pissed, but it's really annoying. And so if we can change culturally lawns, that would be great. But in the meantime, the best I can do is other landscaping methods. If anyone has any recommendations for how to keep grass out of my box garden, I would greatly appreciate that, because right now me and my fingers are just fighting for our life, just pulling them out all the time. Landscaping fabric is not really doing a whole lot here, so I need to find solutions for that. If you hung out to the rest of this video, thank you for listening to me complain. If you like this video, let me know in the comments, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.